Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 431 Contest. In fact, after seeing the development of Coster and Merrick's Robin Hood thieves, the restless young and strong refugees in the northern counties have thought about imitating the Robin Hood thieves to set up a new thieves group in order to dominate and eat and drink. But the problem is that they don't have enough weapons. After all, behind Coster and Merrick stands Marin, who has a large number of weapons workshops and can openly supply standard weapons such as spears and bows and arrows. Therefore, the Robin Hood thieves developed smoothly. But others can't. Although some young refugees with active minds have also formed some new independent thieves groups, they just can't grow. The main reason is that they don't have enough weapons. Some thieves groups, because they have no weapons, can only use the simplest wooden sticks and some metal farm tools they have robbed. In this way, they can rob poor farmers. Once they encounter the manor of the well-defended manor owner, it is difficult to conquer. Therefore, it is difficult for them to become a climate. However, because they robbed a lot of ordinary farmers, they also created a large number of new refugees in several counties in central England. However, no matter how much these bandits made trouble, no one dared to shout out the declaration of kings, princes, generals, and ministers, are they of the same species? Because whoever dared to shout such a slogan, those nobles would desperately form a group to suppress it. After all, the mouth cannot be opened randomly. As for Marin, although he wanted to mess up central England, he did not dare to let Coster and Merrick shout such slogans. Because if a precedent was set, Europe would be lively in the future. Maybe the people under his rule would do the same to him. On the German side, when Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, and Joachim I, the Elector of Brandenburg, heard that Marin accused them of treason, they were so angry that their faces turned green. However, although they were extremely annoyed, Frederick III and Joachim I had no time to go to Worms to defend themselves. Everything had to wait until the war was over. However, Marin blackened himself like this. By the time the war was over, they would have been as black as charcoal, and it would be difficult to whitewash them. So, Frederick III decided to fight. To this end, Frederick III and Joachim I sent their civil servants to Worms to defend their actions. The envoys of Saxony and Brandenburg declared that the reason why the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg sent troops was to maintain justice and order. The two countries were indignant about Marin in East Frisia, and Lübeck and Hamburg forcibly plundering the Duchy of Schleswig and the Duchy of Holstein, which originally belonged to the Oldenburg family. This is why they accepted the invitation of His Majesty Hans and sought justice from East Frisia, Lübeck and Hamburg, which broke the rules. Frederick III was very smart. He repeatedly told his men not to mention the Kingdom of Denmark, but only to emphasize the Oldenburg family. Because the Kingdom of Denmark is indeed a foreign country. However, the Oldenburg family has always been German. The two countries helped the Kingdom of Denmark fight the German fiefdom, which was indeed suspected of treason. But the problem is that King Hans of Denmark, who came from the Oldenburg family of the Earldom of Oldenburg, was not an outsider. As long as the identity of the German Oldenburg family is emphasized, the suspicion of colluding with the monarchs of other countries can be avoided. Sure enough, Frederick III's statement was supported by many old nobles. After all, old nobles all attach great importance to bloodline. King Hans of Denmark did come from the old German noble family, the Oldenburg family. Frederick III's defense of himself in this way was indeed very clever. Unfortunately, it was useless. Because Marin had already arranged for Kohler to send a large number of spies to buy off bards from various countries, and use rap art throughout Germany to discredit Frederick III and Joachim I everywhere. No matter how Frederick III and Joachim I refuted, that was a matter of the Worms imperial parliament. But among the people, Marin had already bought off those popular European storytellers, the bards, and severely blackened the two. No matter how eloquent they are, they can't cover up the fact that they have joined forces with foreign monarchs to attack their own principalities. Under the extensive propaganda of the bards, the German people and small nobles in many regions knew that the Holy Roman Empire had two nobles who were not from the inside out, the Elector of Saxony Frederick III and the Elector of Brandenburg Joachim I. After all, Frederick III was an orthodox old noble, and the route he took was also the official route. How could Marin be so shameless? He was willing to spend money to spread public opinion among the people. And this trick was very useful. After all, there was a great lack of entertainment in Europe in this era. The common people liked to listen to the bards bragging the most. It's a pity that the common people in this era didn't have much money to reward the bards, which made most of the bards very poor. Therefore, the spies sent by Kohler bought off a large number of bards with just a little money. After all, those bards need to eat. In order to earn money, those bards followed the scripts provided by the spies and began to sing about Frederick III and Joachim I in various taverns and other public places. Unfortunately, the people of this era, who lack entertainment culture, like this very much. Then, these bards were strongly surrounded by the people who had nothing to do after the spring plowing. Moreover, the script given by Marin was very exciting. It not only pointed out the fact that the Elector of Saxony and the Elector of Brandenburg colluded with foreign monarchs to invade their own forces, but also fabricated a false story that Frederick III and Joachim I attempted to elect the King of Denmark as the Holy Roman Emperor after the death of His Majesty Maximilian I. Then, the script repeatedly emphasized that the Danish, the leader of the Nordic Vikings, was going to invade Germany. If the King of Denmark became the Holy Roman Emperor, those tall, fierce, bloodthirsty and cruel Vikings would carry blood-stained axes and run rampant in the German region, chopping anyone they disliked. This story was so wonderful and it seemed like it was true. In addition, information dissemination was so scarce in this era, so many ordinary people actually believed it. So, a bizarre rumor that the Vikings would invade Germany quickly spread throughout Germany. In fact, the Vikings had fallen as early as the 11th century, 400 or 500 years ago. However, various barbaric legends of the Vikings still echoed on the European continent. Therefore, the bard just bragged about it casually, and many ordinary people believed it to be true. Then, these ordinary people hated the two people, Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, and Joachim I, the Elector of Brandenburg, who tried to collude with the Viking leader, King Hans of Denmark. Some radical citizens even shouted slogans to depose Frederick III and Joachim I, and suggested that they be imprisoned. Of course, these citizens were not from Saxony and Brandenburg. Otherwise, they would have been imprisoned long ago. At this time, Frederick III and Joachim I, who were on the front line, did not know that their reputations in most parts of Germany were already bad. As long as they dared to show up without the army's escort, they would be greeted with rotten eggs. Of course, Marin, who planned all this, did not know that his two opponents had a bad reputation at this time. Because he was besieged in the city of Lübeck, it was inconvenient to contact the outside world. Because Frederick III lined up a lot of trebuchets on the west side of the Travo River, Marin's ships did not dare to approach the port of Lübeck easily. Because hundreds or thousands of trebuchets throwing fireballs together were too terrible for wooden ships. So Marin prepared to clear the trebuchets on the opposite bank. He ordered the artillery to put the artillery on the top of the city and began to aim at the trebuchets. Within a day, Marin's artillery destroyed hundreds of trebuchets on the opposite bank of the river, which scared the Bossa coalition and hurriedly transported the remaining trebuchets away. Unfortunately, 2 days later, Frederick III came up with a countermeasure. He ordered people to dig a big pit on the river bank. Then, put the trebuchet in the pit. In this way, the cannonballs can't hit the trebuchets. After all, the range of the cannonballs is very long, and it is easy to fly over the top of the big pit where the trebuchet is located. As for hitting the cannonball into the big pit in a parabola, this is a bit too difficult. Marin suddenly regretted not bringing the batch of cohorn mortars. Because mortars are specifically designed to restrain tunnels. Unfortunately, it was too late to say anything. He brought cannons with low trajectories, and there was no way to deal with the trebuchets in the tunnels. However, after the trebuchets of the Bossa coalition were placed in the big pit, because the trebuchets had a parabolic trajectory, they were not affected at all when hitting the wooden boats moored at the pier. In desperation, Marin had to stop the shelling. Because the cannons with low trajectories had no way to deal with those big pits. Fortunately, before the other side's trebuchets were built, Marin's fleet had already transported insufficient food and ammunition. Even if the wooden boats could no longer dock, it would not affect the combat effectiveness of the army in the city. At the same time, the Bossa coalition forced the local people to fill a large number of sandbags in the southeast and eastern parts of Lübeck. As time went on, it was not a problem for these two sections to be filled with sandbags. At that time, it would be easier for the Bossa coalition to attack the city of Lübeck. Of course, Marin was not idle either. He sent out spies who were good at swimming, took his own handwritten letter, swam across the Travo River, and went to the seaside to inform Kidd, the commander of the East Frisian fleet, to send a ship back to the country to transport dozens of cohorn mortars in the warehouse to deal with the catapults in the tunnels. In addition, if possible, let the people in the foundry cast more cohorn cannons to shoot out. After all, it is not difficult to cast copper cannons, and there are ready-made iron molds. With the large amount of copper ingots shipped from the Swedish Faron copper mine, it is not difficult to cast more cohorn cannons to shoot out. As for how to transport the cohorn mortars into the city, this is also easy. Send 2 ships to transport the cannons to the dock at the risk of their lives. Even if these 2 ships are sunk, as long as the cannons are transported ashore, it will be a great success. The loss of 2 ships is nothing to Marin. Chapter 432, The Death of Catherine. In the city of London, in the garden tower of the Tower of London, a terrible thing is happening here. Someone is poisoning the Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. This guard named Robinson is exactly the same as Coster's alias, and it is a very English name. In England, there are not too many Johnsons and Robinsons. Robinson was born into a family of knights, and his family background is not prominent or rich. He was lucky to get the job of guarding the Tower of London. After all, the Tower of London is now the royal palace. The Tower of London lost its function as a palace because Henry VIII later went on a killing spree, killing 2 queens and a large number of people including Princess Margaret in the Tower of London, and most of them died unjustly, so the legend of the wronged souls in the Tower of London was born. Then, Henry VIII built other palaces and gradually moved to other places to live. Later, the Tower of London became a prison specifically for high-ranking prisoners. Although Robinson is also a palace guard of the Tower of London, he is not engaged in the top-notch job of standing guard and guarding the king, queen and other royal family members, but is responsible for guarding the high-ranking prisoners in the Tower of London. Of course, this kind of job is enough to make those poor knights who didn't get a good job envious. After all, as a palace guard, the salary is relatively sufficient, and it is never in arrears. After all, it is too embarrassing for the royal family to owe the salary of the palace guards. In fact, guarding prisoners is also a certain amount of money. For example, a noble committed a crime and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. If the crime committed by the noble is not too serious, then the guards responsible for guarding him, especially those at the captain level like Robinson, can receive bribes from the noble's family. This is because those family members must hope that their relatives will not suffer in there. But since they are in prison, the treatment must be bad. Therefore, if you want to eat something good or read some books, this is an important entertainment activity for senior prisoners. After all, being in prison is too lonely, you need to go through the guards, especially the captain of the guards who have a little say like Robinson. The guards are responsible for delivering the delicious food and books and other entertainment things sent by the nobles' families, but if you want the guards to do this, you need to pay enough money for them to do it. Therefore, many people still envy Robinson's job. However, Robinson's responsibility to guard Princess Catherine this time is not a good job. Why? Because Princess Catherine was ordered by Henry VII to be detained in secret, and it was impossible for the Spanish royal family to know. The prisoner's family was unaware of it, and as the captain of the guard, Robinson would not receive any benefits. After all, as a knight with a small fiefdom, Robinson didn't have much money. This is also an important reason why Robinson was bribed by Princess Margaret, because Princess Margaret paid hundreds of gold coins. And this time Robinson didn't want to poison Princess Catherine. However, since Margaret had secretly cooperated with Marin, she had become rich and powerful, and offered a huge reward of 5,000 gold coins, which directly knocked Robinson out. In addition, after Margaret obtained the support of Marin's North Sea Chamber of Commerce, she had a way to kill the chef and help Robinson offend, which made Robinson finally determined to do this vote. Of course, Robinson is a very cautious person. He decided to poison after he found out that the scapegoat chef named Jason happened to be at work that day. Because after he took action, he needed to kill Jason as a scapegoat to confuse the enemy's sight. So, if Jason didn't go to work that day, but he poisoned it, then even if Jason was killed, it would be impossible to help him divert his attention. Therefore, only when Jason was at work, and he was at work for the past 2 days, Robinson could poison Princess Catherine and put the blame on Jason's head. On that day, Jason happened to be the chef who cooked for Princess Catherine. He made a pot of dark cuisine, and then handed it to the guards and gave it to Princess Catherine for consumption. England is a country with very backward cooking skills, and it has been like this until later generations. In this era, almost every Englishman eats dark cuisine. After Catherine arrived here, she could only follow the local customs and eat dark cuisine every day. In fact, after Prince Arthur died, Catherine wanted to leave England because she couldn't stand England's dark cuisine. However, Henry VII was more ruthless. In order to keep Catherine, he directly forcibly detained her and imprisoned her in the Tower of London garden. According to the procedure, after Chef Jason prepared the food, the tasters in the kitchen ate it and confirmed that it was non-toxic, and then the members of the guard class would take the food to the prisoners. After all, the people imprisoned in the Tower of London were all high-ranking nobles. Although they were prisoners, their lives must be guaranteed. After Robinson learned of this, he went to the kitchen to receive the food in person that day. He went to the kitchen to eat in advance under the pretext of going to the kitchen to find food, and also drank with Jason and other chefs. While Jason was not paying attention, Robinson put the chronic poison into the pot. When the tasters ate it, because it was a chronic poison, and the smell of the poison was relatively light, and it was covered by the strange smell of the dark cuisine, they naturally could not taste any problems. Even if the poison was to kill him, it would take 3 days. This was a major loophole that Robinson found after careful consideration. If the taster did not die, but Princess Catherine was poisoned to death. At that time, the guard who delivered the food would still be suspected. Moreover, in order to avoid contact with the food, Robinson pretended to be drunk and lay directly on the table pretending to fall asleep. Jason had no choice but to call another guard to deliver the food to Princess Catherine. The next night, the unlucky chef Jason was killed in his own home. On Jason's body, the killer deliberately left a copper button engraved with French words. However, the death of a cook did not have much impact on the government and the public in England. It was not until 3 days later, when poor Princess Catherine and the taster died of poisoning, that everyone began to pay attention to Jason's death. Henry VII sent out investigators to investigate Jason's cause of death. As a result, a copper button with French inscriptions was found in the corner of the scene. Humph, it must be the French who instructed Jason to poison Princess Catherine. Henry VII said angrily, slapping the table. It is obvious that with Princess Catherine's death, the alliance between England and Spain will inevitably break. And who will benefit the most in the end? Obviously the French. Because the alliance between England and Spain is to deal with the French. Although Scotland is an enemy of England, it is not an enemy of Spain. There is no reason or motivation to poison Princess Catherine of Spain. Generally speaking, this inference is not a problem. Because, why would you poison someone who has nothing to do with you when you are full? However, they don't know that there is a full Marin standing behind them. Of course, there is also Princess Margaret who is thinking about her brother. In order to destroy the alliance between the Tudor dynasty and Spain, these two people took ruthless actions. On the surface, Marin and England have nothing in common, and the English are no longer suspicious of him. But in fact, Marin is the most important driving force. Because the strong financial resources of Princess Margaret come from Marin's support. Before this, the hundreds of gold coins that Princess Margaret spent to win over Knight Robinson were all her private money that she had secretly hidden for many years. Because her husband Richard Bull strictly supervised the finances and did not give her too much money to prevent her from making trouble and disrupting the Tudor dynasty. However, after contacting the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, Marin privately gave a large amount of profits from grain trade to Princess Margaret through the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, making her rich and buying many people to work for her privately. Without the knowledge of Henry VII and Richard Pole, Princess Margaret was able to influence the overall situation in England with her strong financial resources. For example, this time she bribed Knight Robinson and poisoned Princess Catherine. Speaking of which, Catherine of Aragon was really unlucky. Originally in history, although she was not poisoned to death, she was abandoned by her husband Henry VIII and died of depression. This life is even more miserable. She was killed by the two conspirators, Princess Margaret and Marin, at a young age. Moreover, these two people had no grudges against Princess Catherine. Chapter 433 Huge Influence. The death of Princess Catherine had a huge impact. Henry VII was panicked. England was in turmoil at the moment. If he offended Spain, a maritime power, he would have made a powerful enemy for nothing. Spain is different from France. It has the ability to severely damage the British fleet. As long as Spain is ruthless and sends out its main fleet to attack the English fleet, the chance of winning is very high. Because the Spanish caravel is a very suitable ship type for naval warfare. Moreover, the Spanish have also begun to equip their ships with artillery. The British have not yet developed British galleons, and are still using the same cog sailing ships as the Hanseatic League. They are also still popular with the backward naval warfare tactics of jumping boats and hacking at each other. If the cog sailing ship and the backward jumping boat gang hacking tactics are used against France, whose navy is even more rubbish, they may still have an advantage. But against the Spanish warships that have already widely used artillery, there is really no chance of winning. To put it another way, even if the English fleet can repel the Spanish fleet, it will definitely suffer heavy losses. At that time, the French will take action again and may be able to destroy the English fleet. Without the protection of the fleet, England would not be a match for France, the land overlord. Perhaps, England would stage another Norman conquest. Thinking of this, Henry VII was sweating coldly. For this reason, he did not care about his face and directly summoned the Spanish envoy stationed in London, swearing that the death of Princess Catherine had nothing to do with England and was entirely a conspiracy of the French. Then, Henry VII also gave the copper button engraved with French found in Jason's house to the Spanish envoy as evidence and took it back to Spain. At the same time, Henry VII also wrote a very humble letter in Latin, expressing his deep apologies to Ferdinand II. However, Henry VII pointed out that as long as he was not crazy, he would definitely not choose to kill Princess Catherine. After all, he was still counting on an alliance with the Spaniards. After the letter was sent, Henry VII immediately issued a statement with a different face, strongly condemning the despicable French and accusing them of poisoning the Spanish Princess Catherine. Now, Henry VII didn't care whether it was the French who did it. Now, the first thing he had to do was to force the blame on the French so that he could avoid the anger of the Spanish. At the same time, Henry VII also searched the residences of foreigners in London. Whenever he found daggers, poisons and other things related to assassination, the parties involved would be arrested and tortured. Fortunately, the people of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce did not place the killer in the Chamber of Commerce. Although the Chamber of Commerce was thoroughly searched, no items related to the assassination were found. The French were more miserable. They were the focus of the search of the English court. Moreover, in this era, isn't it normal to carry daggers and short knives for self-defense? But now the English court is eager to clear itself of suspicion, so it treats foreigners very cruelly. Anyone who carried a dagger or short knife suitable for assassination, or had poison, was taken to prison. For a time, the city of London was in a state of panic. Fortunately, the assassins of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce did not live in the London branch of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, but hid in a small courtyard outside the city. Moreover, the daggers, poisons and other tools were hidden very well, and the English soldiers who searched the whole city did not find any handles. But the French suffered. They made a living by doing business in the enemy country, so they naturally had to prevent the malice of the people of the enemy country at any time. Therefore, they were also used to carrying daggers or short knives for self-defense. Unexpectedly, at this critical moment, these daggers and short knives became their death warrants. At this time, Henry VII was like crazy, biting whoever he caught, and he didn't care whether the French merchants were wronged. Anyway, as long as they were French, they were very unlucky. Besides, Britain and France were mortal enemies. Originally, the confrontation between tens of thousands of troops between the Bassa coalition and the Massa alliance, the abbreviation of the alliance between Marin and the Hanseatic League, was the most concerned news in the European aristocracy. But after Princess Catherine died, the news that the Spanish Princess Catherine was abused and eventually killed in Britain immediately replaced the war and became the headline news in the European aristocracy. In fact, this was deliberately spread by the North Sea Chamber of Commerce. Under Marin's instructions, except for England, other European countries had already been arranged by Marin's men. As soon as Princess Catherine died, they began to spread the news that the British not only imprisoned the Spanish Princess Catherine, but also poisoned Catherine madly after being accused by the Spaniards, and framed France. At this time, King Louis XII of France also jumped out and vowed that France had never thought about or done anything to poison Princess Catherine. He swore on the king's honor that he would never send anyone to poison Princess Catherine. As for what happened in London, it was Henry VII who deliberately framed the innocent French. Seeing that the King of France had come out to swear, the people in the European aristocratic circle believed that it was the British who did it. Because, if the King of France was not sure, he would definitely not swear casually. In this way, the image of Britain, crying thief, became more obvious. At this time, in Spain, there was a big quarrel. The Spanish aristocratic circle was divided into two factions. One faction believed that the British were to blame for the death of Princess Catherine, and that they should sever diplomatic relations with Britain and turn hostile. As for whether to take action, let's wait and see. The other faction believed that the matter was too strange and the French were indeed highly suspected. Moreover, falling out with Britain was not in the national interest of Spain. Therefore, whether it was done by the French or not, it was in the national interest of Spain to treat it as if it was done by the French. One of the two factions was the impulsive faction, which was mainly composed of young and strong aristocrats. The other faction was the rational faction, which was mainly composed of elderly aristocrats. However, although the young nobles were not rational enough, they made a lot of noise in the name of honor, which made the rational nobles a little overwhelmed. After all, Spain was indeed embarrassed by the poisoning of its own princess. As for Ferdinand II, he leaned towards the rational nobles. After all, he was also a veteran politician. Moreover, Ferdinand II was a man who valued sons over daughters. He did not value his daughters and only valued Prince Juan. Therefore, he was more embarrassed about Catherine's death than he was really angry. Therefore, he leaned towards the rational nobles in this matter. However, the young nobles forced Ferdinand II, Catherine's father, to be embarrassed in the name of honor, and it was difficult for him to make a decision. Therefore, this matter can only be delayed for the time being, and a verbal lawsuit will be fought first. Chapter 434, Poisoning and Running Away. On the Danish side, after receiving intelligence from the south, Prince Christian led an army of 20,000 and spent 10 days to rush to the outside of Ribe. At this time, Wolf Esbrand had already brought 3,000 elite soldiers into the city and was ready for defense. In fact, there were 4,000 elite soldiers and 2,000 to 3,000 civilians in Ribe at this time. If all of them were pulled up on the city wall, the Danish army would not be able to capture it in a short time. However, in order not to scare Prince Christian, Wolf Esbrand ordered that only the original 1,000 elite soldiers, wearing white-bottomed black cross vests, stand on the top of the city as the main force to resist the Danish attack. The other 3,000 elite reinforcements all changed into the clothes of ordinary people and looked like civilians. Sure enough, this gave Prince Christian an illusion that only 1,000 of the defenders on the top of the city were regular soldiers, and the rest were civilians. In fact, the defenders on the top of the city were all regular troops, and the civilians were all substitutes under the city. However, when the Danish army attacked the city, Wolf Esbrand only ordered 250 muskets to be taken out for resistance. Because, according to the ratio of spearmen to musketeers in the Marin army, which is 3-to-1, musketeers should account for a quarter of the regular army. On the surface, there should be only 1,000 regular troops on the top of the city, and of course there should be only 250 muskets. As for the other 750 musketeers of the other 3,000, Wolf Esbrand simply did not let them go up to the city wall, but selected 750 young hunters who were good at archery from the civilians to replace them, and used bows and arrows to fight the enemy on the top of the city. However, 250 muskets are not a small number. The Danish army is all spearmen, so there are no muskets to shoot at the defenders. Even if there are a small number of archers, the damage is very limited. You should know that during the defense of Vienna in 1529, the Austrian army used 72 muskets to stun the Turkish army of 200,000. Even though the artillery blasted open the city wall, it was unable to capture Vienna from the damaged part of the city wall. Now, there are 250 muskets on the top of the city. On the front battlefield, a charge may disrupt the formation, but with the city wall as a support, it is impossible to suppress the Danish army comprehensively, but it is still possible to suppress the Danish army severely at a certain point and surface. After all, the Danish army is only 20,000 people. It is impossible to bloom in all directions. Generally, they will choose to focus on attacking a certain direction to seek a breakthrough. In this way, as long as 250 musketeers are concentrated in the direction of the main attack of the Danish army, the effect of suppressing the Danish army can be achieved. Sure enough, when the Danish army attacked the north city wall, the 250 musketeers used continuous rain of bullets to severely suppress the Danish offensive. The Danish army also needs to be equipped with muskets. Damn, this battle is so pathetic. Prince Christian said angrily, jumping up and down after several attacks were repelled. Before, he looked down on the use of muskets. Because the loading of muskets is too slow, as long as the cavalry charges, they can rush to the musketeers and kill them at will. However, the performance of musketeers in the battle of defending the city is too outstanding. After all, no matter how fast your cavalry is, they can't rush up the city wall. The musketeers on the top of the city have enough time to load ammunition and have no sense of urgency. After all, the siege ladders are set up and people climb up the high city walls. During this period, the musketeers must have enough time to load. Besides, the musketeers are protected by spearmen. With their own safety fully guaranteed, the musketeers, with 50 grams of lead bullets, taught the Danish army how to be a man. In fact, at the same time, Frederick III, who was far away under the city of Lübeck, also planned to equip muskets. However, Frederick III saw it more clearly: the matchlock gun was the most invincible when defending the city. On the front battlefield, if the cavalry rushed in front of them, it would be tragic. Of course, digging 2 trenches in front of the battle and filling the trenches with sharp stakes, as Marin did, could ensure the safety of the musketeers. However, in this way, the army was fixed and it was difficult to play the advantage of attack. Even in the previous Battle of Leer County, the classic battle in which Marin defeated Duke Albrecht of Saxony, the reason why the Saxon army failed was more because the high platform and the general flag where Duke Albrecht was located happened to be defeated by the naval guns on Marin's warships. As a result, the Saxon army thought that Duke Albrecht was killed by the cannon, and coupled with Marin's loud rumors, they were in chaos. Therefore, in that war, the Saxon army lost more because of luck. But after seeing with his own eyes the thousands of musketeers brought by Marin, who defeated the soldiers of the Bosse coalition who were trying to attack, Frederick III had to admit that the musketeers were too powerful in the battle to defend the city. Therefore, Frederick III planned to form a small number of musketeer troops in the army of the Electorate of Saxony after the war. However, it was mainly used to defend the city. In a head-on confrontation, the Saxons still believed more in the charge of heavy cavalry. Even if the heavy cavalry could not charge well, weren't there powerful Swiss spearmen? Although both of them thought of equipping musketeers, Frederick III had a planned arrangement, while Prince Christian was more of an angry remark after being frustrated. But Prince Christian was not a fool. He had also heard that when the English were besieging Dublin, Ireland, they attacked when Edward's musketeers were silent on rainy days. So he was not in a hurry and decided to wait until the rainy day to take it down in one go. Anyway, in his opinion, there were only 1,000 regular troops on the top of the city. If the matchlock guns were to misfire on a rainy day, and the Danish army launched a strong attack, it would be impossible to take it down. So, in the following days, he simply kept his troops in place. Then, in the main account, he entertained several lieutenants to drink. And General Maxim, the lieutenant Jim currently served, was one of them. In order to get the opportunity to attack, Jim followed General Maxim every day and flattered him wildly. Finally, he got the opportunity to sneak into the main account and stand behind General Maxim to serve. Once, several generals and Prince Christian were drunk, Jim took the initiative to pour wine for Prince Christian and several lieutenants. While pouring the wine, Jim quickly slid the cantrila into Prince Christian's wine glass. Under normal circumstances, some of the people present might notice it. However, everyone was drunk and no one noticed this. Then, Prince Christian drank the poisoned wine without knowing it. Seeing Prince Christian drink the wine with the highly toxic cantrila, Jim felt safe. Because the poison would take effect in 7 days, Jim did not rush to escape. Instead, he deliberately found a few colleagues of similar adjutant rank to drink with him the next day. While drinking, Jim pretended to be drunk. Then, when he was drunk, he uttered a few Swedish words, which attracted the attention of the adjutants of other generals at the same table. The next night, Jim found an opportunity to run away. Then, the news that he might be a Swedish spy also spread. After leaving the Danish military camp, Jim rode his horse all the way south to find Sakara's army. Because according to the agreement, Sakara was already in the nearby area. However, Sakara had to wait until Prince Christian's poison took effect, which led to chaos in the Danish army, before launching an attack. This way, it would be much safer. Jim rushed over to confirm with Sakara the timetable for Prince Christian's poisoning. However, what Jim didn't know was that on the night he poisoned, Prince Christian drank too much and finally vomited. Most of the cantrila he drank was also vomited out. Chapter 435, The Decision of Charles II. When Marin's army confronted the Bassa coalition, George, the Duke of Saxony, was not idle either. George realized that it was no longer possible to defeat the Duchy of Guedes militarily. So, he decided to take the political route. For example, he appealed to the imperial parliament and exerted political pressure on the Duchy of Guedes. After all, the Duchy of Guedes' occupation of West Frisia was illegal and shameful. Before, when Governor Fiskfrigide and Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden were assassinated, George was furious. Fortunately, he was lucky. Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden had a crooked heart and survived. Moreover, his men were also smart. In order to avoid a second assassination, they concealed the news that Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden was alive. Even the local Emperor Marin did not know that Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden was alive. George is very depressed and angry now. He is angry now, not because of the death of Governor Fiskfrigide. After all, with Baron Stair of Leeuwarden, it was enough to accuse Duke Charles II of Getters. The main reason for his anger was that his cousin, Elector Frederick III of Saxony, did not support him enough. Before, Frederick III found a lot of excuses, set a lot of difficulties, and only lent him 5,000 soldiers. At that time, George believed it. However, in a blink of an eye, in order to help Denmark take revenge, the Duchy of Saxony actually dispatched 15,000 troops to help Denmark attack Lübeck. George was immediately unhappy. You know, he and Frederick III are a family. For a foreign relative, the elite of the country were dispatched. It is said that the 20,000 Swiss mercenaries were hired with the money paid by the Electorate of Saxony and the Electorate of Brandenburg. There is no harm without comparison. Before, George thought that his cousin was indeed very righteous for lending him 5,000 soldiers. But in a blink of an eye, the Elector of Saxony, Frederick III, sent out 15,000 main forces to help Denmark, and also helped to advance half of the salary of 20,000 Swiss mercenaries, which deeply hurt George's heart. You know, if Frederick III supported himself like he supported Denmark, what would the Duchy of Getters be? The Duchy of Getters may indeed have thousands of Swiss mercenaries to help fight. However, the Elector of Saxony helped Denmark this time and paid half of the salary of 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. It is equivalent to hiring 10,000 Swiss mercenaries for Denmark. If Frederick III is willing to help him hire 10,000 Swiss mercenaries, why worry about not being able to defeat the Duchy of Getters? What's more, the Elector of Saxony still has 15,000 troops. George's heart was really hurt, and he no longer believed in his cousin. There was a rift between the two major branches of the Wettin family. But Frederick III refused to help him, and he had no choice. Therefore, George had to run around and persuade those nobles to support him. Especially the meeting place of Worms. George has already made several trips. George hopes to convene the imperial conference as soon as possible so that he can publicly denounce the shameless behavior of the Principality of Guedes for breaking the rules in front of many princes, and hope to avoid paying the huge ransom of more than 1 million gold coins through this meeting. Anyway, he can't afford so much ransom. After returning from the defeat, George also tried to seek help from Hanseatic merchants in Saxony, hoping that they could lend him money. However, those Hanseatic merchants in Saxony felt that the amount of more than 1 million gold coins was too huge. Moreover, George's finances were so bad now that they didn't believe that George could repay the loan. Therefore, George was frequently cold-shouldered during this period. So George could only pin his hopes on the appeals at the imperial conference. To this end, he went to Worms several times and communicated with Archbishop Jacob of Mainz several times. As a large principality, the Principality of Guedes also has a permanent representative in Worms, and this person is called Wasena. Wasena was very curious, because, as far as he knew, Governor Fiskfrigide and Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden had been killed by the Golden Assassin sent by the Principality of Guedes. So, why was Duke George of Saxony still keen on convening the imperial conference? So, Wasena spent a lot of money and invited George's followers to drink in the tavern in Worms through an intermediary. After getting these people drunk, he asked them questions. As a result, Wasena really got a very important piece of information out. Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden had no appetite for the assassination. Because this person's heart was crooked, he escaped. Therefore, George now had a witness to accuse Duke Charles II of Guedes at the imperial conference. Wasena panicked immediately, which was not good news for the Principality of Guedes. After all, the Saxon nobles had much more say in the imperial conference than the Principality of Guedes. Although the Principality of Guedes was in collusion with France, the French had no say in the German imperial conference, which was of little help to them. Wasena hurriedly wrote an urgent letter and sent someone to quickly send it back to the country to inform Charles II of this major change. Charles II, Duke of Guedes, was also shocked after receiving Wasena's urgent letter. Originally, he thought the assassination was a sure thing. But unexpectedly, Baron Zister of Leeuwarden was so weird that his heart grew to the right. This is troublesome. If George brings Baron Zister of Leeuwarden to the imperial conference, he may really lose the case. At that time, the imperial parliament may sentence him to give up West Frisia. Even the ransom of more than 1 million gold coins will be wasted. Although he can ignore the judgment of the imperial parliament, after that, he can forget about mixing in the German aristocratic circle. A person who ignores the decisions of the nobles in the circle will be excluded. In the future, if his descendants want to marry someone, they may not be able to find a partner. And, most importantly, if he loses the case and loses the moral high ground, he will easily be beaten up by a group of people. So, killing Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden is his only choice. However, after the last assassination, the army of the Duchy of Saxony now attaches great importance to the safety of Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden. Charles II sent people to the garrison of the Saxon army in East Frisia to inquire about it, and found that the defense of the Saxon military camp is now extremely tight. Moreover, he borrowed Alsatian wolfhounds from Marin to perform duty and patrol. It is almost impossible for the killer to sneak in again. However, when Charles II's men went to East Frisia for reconnaissance, they also found that after the main force of the East Frisian army went out to fight, the remaining troops retreated to important towns such as Auric, Emden and Leer. The garrisons of the several fortresses on the west side of the Ems River were all withdrawn. So, this wine gave Charles II an opportunity to raid the Saxon camp. At this time, because the garrisons on the west bank of the Ems River were all withdrawn, it was still easy for the army of the Duchy of Gettys to enter East Frisia, and then quietly cross the river to attack the Saxon camp on the east bank of the Ems River. After all, the garrison in the Saxon camp on the east bank of the Ems River was only more than 2,000 people. As long as 3,000 or 4,000 Swiss mercenaries were sent, the remaining Saxons would be defeated steadily. As long as they broke into the Saxon camp, it would be easy to kill Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden. After a fierce ideological struggle, Duke Charles II of Geddes finally made a decision, to send 4,000 elite troops to cross the river at night, and then storm the Saxon camp and kill Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden. Chapter 436 Big Trouble. Charles II selected 4,000 elite Swiss mercenaries, all of whom were elite veterans. There was no problem dealing with the 2,000 Saxon defenders. Even if there were fewer people, they could easily handle it. What's more, it was double the number. However, when selecting soldiers, Captain Sieg, who had always performed well, refused the appointment to lead troops to East Frisia and gave the opportunity to other Swiss mercenaries. The captain of the Sieg mercenary corps was very afraid of Marin. You know, relying on some methods learned from Marin, he has now become a star captain among Swiss mercenaries. Then, as a teacher, Marin is even more capable. In other words, Captain Sieg's ability is only a part of Marin. Marin, who is at full firepower, is the real big devil. Sieg always felt guilty about letting him go to Marin's lair to make trouble. So, he gave this opportunity to other Swiss mercenary groups. But Sieg didn't know that something happened when he gave in. What happened? It was because of the bad habits of the Swiss mercenaries. Although the Swiss mercenaries were brave and good at fighting, they also had many bad habits. For example, they didn't take prisoners, mainly because they didn't take conscripts, because they couldn't get ransom. And they liked to rob. The Swiss liked to leave a lot of cuts on their clothes, but that wasn't for fashion or trends, but to make a few more pockets on their bodies to put in the looted property. In short, in addition to their strong combat effectiveness, the Swiss mercenaries had many other bad habits and were definitely not good people. Only Sieg's mercenary group, after learning from Marin, emphasized discipline and rarely messed around. The Roman mercenary group that replaced Sieg was a traditional Swiss mercenary group, powerful in combat, but also greedy and brutal. When they first entered East Frisia, the Roman mercenary group didn't mess around. After all, as the best in the mercenary world, the Swiss had very good military literacy. At least, they knew, don't do anything weird before the sneak attack succeeded. After arriving at the west bank of the Ems River, they waited for the ferry secretly sent by Groningen. Then, they used the ferry to send all 4,000 Swiss mercenaries to the other side. At this time, it was still early in the morning. Because the Swiss mercenaries set out at night. Seeing that the Saxon military camp was right in front of them, the other side probably hadn't woken up yet, so the Swiss mercenaries launched an attack. The Saxons never thought that the other side would dare to cross the border and send troops to attack, so they were caught off guard. In a panic, hundreds of elite Saxon knights, led by Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden, rushed out of the military camp on horseback. The Swiss immediately divided their troops and pursued them relentlessly. They instinctively felt that Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden was among the group of cavalrymen who rushed out. Although the hundreds of people who rushed out were all on horseback, the pursuers sent by the Swiss were also on horseback. Because the Swiss occupied the stables of the Saxon military camp. Soon, hundreds of Swiss mercenaries rode in pursuit and surrounded Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden and hundreds of Saxon elite knights in an ordinary manner in East Frisia. Afterwards, more than 800 of the most elite mercenaries launched a strong attack on the Saxons who fled into the manor. After half a day of fighting, half of the hundreds of Saxon heavy cavalry were killed, and the rest were either injured or captured. As for Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden, he naturally fell into the hands of the Swiss. Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden knew that he was finished and would definitely die. However, he was unwilling to die in vain. So, he rolled his eyes and decided to pit the army in front of him. How to pit? It is to encourage these people in front of him to rob East Frisia. As Marin's old rival and old friend, Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden knew how powerful Marin was, and he also knew Marin's character of revenge. Therefore, he knew that if the army in front of him looted East Frisia, it would definitely not escape revenge. In this way, it can be regarded as revenge for himself. So, he intentionally or unintentionally chatted with the Swiss officers and told the Swiss that he found a lot of food and various property in the manor. The Swiss really took the bait. After searching, the Swiss really found mountains of food and many kinds of property in the manor, such as various coins, silver and copper utensils and other daily necessities. In addition, there are a lot of high-value daily necessities such as salt, oil, and cloth. Because of the high grain output and the great income of Marin, he was naturally not stingy with the manor stewards and serfs under his command. Therefore, every manor under Marin's command was very rich in supplies. The Swiss immediately became jealous. Faced with wealth, they forgot Charles II's request not to cause trouble, threw away their spears, and put all the coins, gold, silver and copper utensils on their bodies. As for the cloth, it was directly wrapped around their bodies. When the valuable property was loaded, they began to loot high-value materials such as salt, oil and food. However, there were more than 1,000 bags of rye in the manor alone. They had to force the serfs in the manor to transport the grain to the Ems River and then find a boat to transport it back to the West Bank. What they didn't know was that these more than 1,000 bags of rye were only for the daily food needs of the manor, and they were all old grain from the previous year. If they went to the official warehouses in Auric and Lair counties to take a look, they would probably be scared to death. After this group of people joined the large army, they reported the income to the head of the group, Roman. Roman was also a greedy person. When he heard that a small manor had such a big harvest. So, after the whole army crossed the Ems River, he ordered a large-scale robbery on the East Frisian land of hundreds of square kilometers on the west bank of the Ems River. Then, more than a dozen manors on the west bank of East Frisian were all destroyed. A total of 10,000 bags of rye, coins worth 1,000 gold coins, 2,000 pounds of salt, various silver and copper utensils, as well as cloth, cooking oil and other high-value materials were all robbed by this group of Swiss mercenaries. In addition, they also took away 50 horses, 100 cows and 500 sheep. That's not all. Some young and strong men in the manor were also killed during the resistance. The total death toll reached 96 people. Of course, Roman was also afraid of being accused by the Guides people. Therefore, he sent people to kill all the stolen cattle and sheep and pickle them into jerky. The grain was also hidden in the temporarily abandoned fortress of Marin in the border area. Moreover, Roman also sent people to contact grain merchants to transport grain. As long as this batch of grain was sold, the unlucky Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden was also silenced by Roman. So, what he brought back was not, preferably a living person, as Charles II requested, but a corpse. Before he died, Baron Zittel of Leeuwarden told Roman very confidently, "I will wait for you down there, I believe you are not far from death." Roman did not believe Zittel's words, because he had killed so many people, and no one came to take him to hell. But what he didn't know was that the spies Kohler left on the west bank of the Ems River recorded all of this and found out the origin of Roman's mercenary group. Roman's mercenary group was in trouble, and it was a big trouble. But Roman himself didn't know it. Moreover, he didn't tell Charles II, Duke of Guides. For this reason, Charles II was also kept in the dark. Chapter 437, The person is not dead, but it does not affect the result. As for why Captain Roman was so bold and dared to commit such a big case in East Frisia, the main reason was that Roman was not optimistic about the results of Marin's battle this time. Because, the 50,000 troops that Marin faced this time had 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. Out of blind confidence in the combat effectiveness of Swiss mercenaries, Captain Roman believed that Marin was doomed to lose. Once Marin lost, it was still unknown whether Marin could keep the land of East Frisia, let alone retaliate against him. Therefore, based on the judgment that Marin would lose, Roman ordered a large-scale robbery in the manor of East Frisia on the west bank of the Ems River after seeing the benefits. If he was not afraid that the legendary tens of thousands of troops of the Second Legion who stayed in the homeland would come to settle accounts with him, he might have looted the east coast area by the way. Moreover, he also made a lot of money this time. You know, but those 10,000 bags of rye weigh 1 million pounds. Even at the wholesale price of 0.7 pfennig per pound, it is worth 11,600 gold coins. In addition to the coins, salt, silver and copper utensils, cloth, cooking oil and other valuable materials, all sold, the total value is estimated to be more than 15,000 gold coins. For a mercenary group of 4,000 people, this is definitely a huge fortune. In particular, this is just a windfall, just picked up by chance. In the city of Lübeck, when Marin received the information sent by Kohler, he was furious. "I must kill this bastard named Roman. This guy must pay with blood." But after calming down, Marin smiled, "Hey, I was worried about not finding an excuse to turn against the Duchy of Guides. This idiot named Roman sent the excuse to the door. It's best if Charles II doesn't know about it. At that time, it's better to catch him off guard." Marin had already thought about annexing West Frisia. However, he was an ally with Charles II before, and Marin was still thinking about how to find an excuse to turn against him. Look, this idiot named Roman took the initiative to send an excuse. However, although Marin thanked him in his heart, he would not let this guy go. After all, this guy was burning, killing and looting in his own territory. In short, this guy must die. At this time, near the city of Ribe in the northwest of the Principality of Schleswig, something big happened. Although he drank too much that night and vomited most of the Cantrilla poison. However, a small part of the poison still penetrated into Prince Christian's body. The final result was that 7 days later, Prince Christian still had a poison attack. Although he did not die from the poison, Prince Christian still rolled on the bed in extreme pain. Because the poison attack was very fierce, the young Prince Christian lost all his hair overnight, and his face became haggard and terrifying. Even half of his teeth fell out. Although he struggled to survive, Prince Christian temporarily completely lost the ability to move. Without a month of recuperation, he could not walk normally. He was the commander-in-chief of the Danish army. The commander-in-chief was poisoned, and the Danish army's siege naturally stopped. However, the army of Saqqara did not launch an attack in time. Why? This is because Saqqara thought that if we attacked Prince Christian as soon as the poison took effect, wouldn't it be clear that the poisoning is related to ourselves? Therefore, Saqqara did not launch an attack on the 7th day after the poisoning, but on the 10th day after the poisoning, that is, 3 days after Prince Christian took effect, it suddenly launched a night attack on the Danish camp. At this time, Prince Christian was still resting in bed. Although he did not die, he had lost most of his life. Now, Prince Christian can't even eat ordinary food, and can only eat some liquid food such as meat porridge. And the people in the Danish camp were also panicked. After Saqqara's more than 10,000 troops attacked the Danish camp, the Danes were in chaos. The officers wanted to ask the commander-in-chief to make a decision, but the commander-in-chief was still lying on the bed. Several adjutants had different opinions, but before they could discuss it, the gate of the camp was broken by Saqqara's English mercenaries. Fight for meat. The battle cry of the English mercenaries was very strange, which was the result of their usual training. After shouting this slogan, the English mercenaries were full of fighting spirit and invincible. Stared at by a group of English mercenaries who were training hard for meat, the Danes who woke up in the middle of the night were immediately discouraged. There were also some North Frisians in the Danish army, and they could understand English. But after understanding the slogan of the English mercenaries, they were scared to death. Why? Because they mistakenly thought that the English mercenaries were man-eating demons. Seeing their red eyes, the North Frisians in the Danish army thought that the other side was going to eat their meat. So, these people were scared and ran away. Then, many Danish camps were in chaos. However, after the Swiss castration training, the 20,000 Danish troops did not collapse immediately. Because they had received special training to guard against night attacks. Because the Danes also knew that Marin was a master of night attacks, how could they not be on guard? Unfortunately, in the past 2 or 3 days, because Prince Christian almost died after taking poison, the Danish army was in a panic. Therefore, despite the large number of people, they were still suppressed by the 15,000 troops led by Saqqara, and failure was only a matter of time. This was mainly because Saqqara sent out elite forces to divide and surround the Danish camp, preventing the Danish soldiers from gathering. If they could not form a large formation with a large number of people, even if the Danish army had more people and did not explode the camp, they would not be able to beat the East Frisian army, which was more orderly and formed a tight formation. After dividing the Danish camp into several large pieces, Saqqara began to command the army, concentrate superior forces, and clear out the various camps where the enemy troops were concentrated one by one. Victory is only a matter of time. Seeing that there was no way to save the situation, the Deputy General Maxim made up his mind and took a team of confidants, carrying the sick Prince Christian, and rushed out of the west gate of the camp under the desperate protection of more than 3,000 troops from his own army. Then, General Maxim did not lead his troops north immediately, but ran directly to the western port, found a large ship, sent Prince Christian on board, and sent his men to drive the ship to Esbjerg, a Danish port a little north. After all, with Prince Christian's current weak body, he would probably die halfway if he took the land route and sat in a bumpy carriage. It was better to take a boat, at least it was not as bumpy as a carriage. And he himself, with the remaining more than 2,000 men, retreated northward along the land route overnight to Esbjerg to meet Prince Christian. After several hours of fierce fighting, at dawn, despite the training for night attacks, the Danes were still defeated. Except for the more than 2,000 people of General Maxim and Prince Christian who escaped, the others were either killed in battle or captured. The army of Saqqara only lost more than 300 people. And the Danes, the number of deaths and captures reached more than 17,000. The main method of the Danish anti-night attack training was to put weapons in the tent, and the soldiers tried to sleep in their clothes. The junior officers also slept among the soldiers, not alone in the officers' quarters. Only the senior officers had their own tents. Once they encountered a night attack, the soldiers immediately took up their weapons, quickly gathered together with the soldiers of the same unit in the nearest tent, and formed a formation to protect themselves under the leadership of the junior officers. If the number of enemy troops coming for the night attack is small, they will be squeezed into the camp by the Danish army that forms a formation to protect themselves. Then, the grassroots officers will move slowly according to the training method, and slowly merge with other parts of the army to form a real formation. As the army converges, the night attack army will eventually be surrounded by the assembled Danish army and then be eliminated. This method is a counter-tactic specially designed by a talented Swiss officer named Fabian based on the characteristics of Marin's proficiency in using a small number of troops for night attacks. Fabian is also one of the main instructors who helped Denmark train the army this time. He is a talented military theorist and is very famous in Switzerland. But unfortunately, there are too many enemy troops in this night attack. Although there is a tactic of anti-night attack by forming a formation nearby to protect oneself, Sakara's army has 15,000 people, which directly divided and surrounded the Danish army. The original tactic of forming a formation nearby to protect oneself has become the biggest weakness of the Danish army. Because the tactic of forming a formation nearby to protect oneself has divided the Danish army into more than a dozen pieces. Although each block has good defensive power. However, this also disperses the troops. If dealing with a small night attack force, it is natural to use the space compression method to gradually merge and then besiege the enemy night attack force that broke in. It can be used to deal with a large number of enemy troops that took advantage of the situation to divide and surround themselves. This tactic is basically a dead end. Therefore, the Danish army was easily dealt with by Sakara's tactics of dividing and surrounding, and then concentrating superior forces to clear them piece by piece. When clearing out the small square formations of the Danish army that formed formations for self-protection piece by piece, Sakara's tactics were very brutal. He ordered his men to push hundreds of Eudios chariots full of spears and violently crash into the small square formations of the Danish army. The Danish spearmen were unable to keep up with the total length of the chariots because of the length of their spears. In addition, the huge impact of the chariots. They were either skewered by the chariots full of spears, or avoided. Then, as the chariots continued to attack, the Danish small square formations naturally became chaotic. Then, Sakara concentrated its superior forces and rushed from all directions to the Danish phalanx whose formation was disrupted. Once the formation was in chaos, the Danes who formed a formation to protect themselves naturally could not withstand the fierce attack of the soldiers under Sakara who had an absolute advantage in numbers, and they could only go to defeat. When Jim learned from the captives that Prince Christian was not dead, he regretted and slapped his head. No wonder the Danes did not collapse and could resist for several hours. It turned out that their coach was not dead. Therefore, the Danish army was just panic-stricken, not psychologically collapsed. In addition, the Danish army had received strict anti-night attack training before, so the Sakara army had a difficult time. However, because everyone was wearing double-layer mahjong mat armor with decent protection, the casualties were not great. Many attacks of the Danish spearmen were blocked by double-layer mahjong mats. In particular, the outer layer of mahjong mat armor was protected by iron sheets. Although more than 300 people were lost, the opponent's losses were more than 17,000 people. Of course, the loss of more than 300 people was mainly due to too many new recruits. After statistics, Sakara found that most of these more than 300 people were English mercenaries who went to the battlefield for the first time. As for the 5,000 veterans sent by Wolf Esperand, only a dozen were injured, but no one was fatally injured. The reason why there were many casualties among the new recruits of English mercenaries was that some of them rushed too hard and rushed into the enemy's crowd. Facing the spears stabbed from all directions by Danish soldiers, it was really hard to escape. But fortunately, although Prince Christian was not poisoned, the Danes still lost, and lost miserably. Although more than 2,000 people escaped, if they had the courage, those people would not dare to go back and provoke the East Frisian army again. Because they were already scared. Moreover, the number of the other side was too small. Anyway, although the process did not match the script, after all, Prince Christian was not poisoned, the result was still perfect. After all, the East Frisian army destroyed this large-scale Danish army at a very small cost. Next, the main force of the army will move south to support the Lübeck battlefield. Chapter 438, Bombarding Copenhagen. When Sakara proposed to lead the army south to support Lübeck, Wolf Esperand frowned, and then said worriedly, "I heard that there are more than 10,000 troops in Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, all of which are the main force. What if both of our troops go south and the Danes go crazy and attack the Duchy of Schleswig?" Sakara thought about it and it was true. However, he had no choice, so he had to say, "How about I lead my 10,000 troops south, and your troops stay put?" Not appropriate. If only your 10,000 troops go south, if they are met by the main force of the Bossa coalition, they will definitely be defeated. Therefore, I will provide at least 8,000 veterans to accompany you south. In this way, even if you are surrounded by the main force of the Bossa coalition, you will have the strength to fight. If the other side has fewer people, they will definitely not be able to defeat you. If there are more people, the Duke can directly leave the city and attack us from the front and back. Sakara nodded. Wolf Esperon's concerns were reasonable. Although the southward march was to be quick and covert, there was no guarantee that the Bassa coalition would send out scouts to find them. If they were discovered by the enemy's scout cavalry in advance, they would be blocked. If they only took 10,000 people with them to the south, and the enemy only needed to stop their 10,000 people and then send out superior forces to surround them, they would have no choice but to wait to be eliminated. But with the addition of 8,000 veterans from the Duchy of Schleswig, it would be different. 18,000 people facing 50,000 Bassa coalition forces, even if they were defeated, they could still protect themselves for a long time. Moreover, if the enemy wanted to eat up the 18,000 troops on their side, they would have to send out at least 30,000 to 40,000 people. In this way, the enemy's encirclement of Lübeck would have to be relaxed. And with the ability of his Lord Marin, he would never miss such a good opportunity. At that time, while the encirclement outside the city was relaxed, more than 20,000 people in the city would definitely come out. Then, the two sides would attack from the front and back, and the enemy's failure was very likely. Of course, this was the worst-case scenario. In fact, there was also a best-case scenario. For example, these 18,000 people were not discovered by the spies of the Bassa coalition. Then, they suddenly attacked the camp of the Bassa coalition, and it was a night attack. But the premise is that after the army went south, the Danes did not get nervous and suddenly sent out a large army to attack them from behind. If they had just left, the Danish army suddenly attacked the Jutland Peninsula from Zealand Island, and it would be easy to take advantage of the lack of troops in the Duchy of Schleswig and occupy the local area. The most dangerous thing is that more than 10,000 Danes came from behind. If it was a little further north, it would not be a big deal. If it happened to be near the camp of the Bassa coalition, it would be a lot of fun. Under the pincer attack from the Bassa coalition and the Danish army, these 18,000 people would definitely die without a burial place. Therefore, Wolf Esperon and Sakara were both very embarrassed and did not dare to lead their troops south easily. Then, the two wrote a report on this situation and sent people south. At night, the intelligence personnel took a small boat across the river and entered the city of Lübeck and handed the report to Marin. After receiving the report, Marin felt a little sorry for not killing Prince Christian. However, he was very happy that the army had wiped out 20,000 Danish main forces. In addition to the more than 2,000 people who ran away, Wolf Esperon and Sakara obtained a total of 12,000 prisoners of war. Although, with Denmark's poor finances and the civilian origins of most of these prisoners of war, it is unlikely that Marin will extort ransom from these prisoners of war, but Marin doesn't care. Because these more than 10,000 people can be used as labor to build roads and dig canals. It just so happens that there is a canal that needs to be dug in the South Munster area. These more than 10,000 prisoners of war can be pulled over to dig canals, regardless of the season. As for the more than 10,000 main forces in Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, which Wolf Esperon and Sakara are worried about, it is indeed a big problem and an unstable factor affecting the war situation. If they follow closely behind Wolf Esperon and Sakara's army, it will indeed affect the safety of the reinforcements. Therefore, it is necessary to come up with a way to keep the more than 10,000 troops in Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, in Copenhagen, so that they will not run around and affect the war situation. Obviously, the best way is to let the Swedish army prepare to attack Copenhagen. In this way, the Danish army in Copenhagen will not dare to attack casually. After all, there are the most core group of Danes in Copenhagen who need to be protected. However, it will take a long time for Sweden to gather its army and then drive to Malmö, which is across the sea from Denmark. If the Danish army goes directly to land before the Swedes come, it will be too late. In fact, Marin had judged before that the Danes might be scared and dare not attack the main force after the fall of Copenhagen last time, so as to avoid the fall of Copenhagen again. Just like the last time, more than 10,000 Danish troops were trapped in Sweden, and Copenhagen was later broken by Marin. Then, there is no need to fight the war. However, that is just Marin's inference, but it does not rule out that King Hans of Denmark got carried away and sent the main force out to fight hard. After all, as long as the Battle of Lübeck is won, it will be fine even if the Danish capital is broken. Because even if Copenhagen is broken, no one dares to kill the Danish nobles. Then, the loss of Copenhagen can be recovered through negotiations after the victory of the coalition. If King Hans has such courage to fight, send the main force to follow the army of Wolf Esperon and Sakara, and start the battle before the support army raids the camp of the Bassa coalition, and then drag it until the main force of the Bassa coalition arrives. Then, this 18,000 reinforcements may really be finished. As long as this support army is finished, Marin will not be able to win. The best result is to lead the troops to break out of the siege and then run away. Although it is certain that Hans is not so courageous, Marin still dare not gamble blindly. So, he came up with a compromise, sending a fleet to bombard Copenhagen and making a gesture of attacking Copenhagen. In this way, the Danes would not dare to send troops out. Moreover, it is very convenient to send warships to bombard Copenhagen. Because Kidd was on the sea of the Bay of Lübeck with 10 warships. As long as an order is given, Kidd can take 10 warships to bombard Copenhagen. After all, the city of Copenhagen is on the edge of the Øresund Strait and is a coastal city. Now that the Danish navy has been destroyed, Lübeck and Hamburg often sweep the Danish ports and take away the big ships. Therefore, the Danes now have no strength to resist the bombardment of the 10 250 class armed merchant ships. If 10 250 class armed merchant ships bombard at the same time, there will be hundreds of heavy artillery bombarding Copenhagen at the same time, and its power should not be underestimated. The only worry is that if the artillery fires in unison, it will consume too much gunpowder. After all, the ship that went to India to buy saltpeter has not returned yet. Marin does not have much gunpowder in the army now, so he has to use it sparingly. However, it is impossible to bombard all day long, but it is still possible to bombard for a day or two to scare the Danes. Next, let the warships fire a few shots sporadically to scare the other side. Of course, this is not enough. Marin also needs to pretend that the Swedish army is about to attack Copenhagen in order to really scare the Danish army. Marin looked at the map of Denmark and suddenly laughed. It turned out that Marin saw on the map that there was a small island of more than 10 square kilometers called Salt Island on the sea a few kilometers east of Copenhagen. This small island is only about 4 kilometers away from Copenhagen. On a sunny day, you can definitely see the distant view of Salt Island standing on the wall of Copenhagen. Marin planned to send people to set up a military camp on Salt Island while bombarding the walls of Copenhagen. Of course, this was a fake military camp, in order to scare the Danes. Anyway, now that the Danes have no navy, it is unlikely that they will send people to Salt Island to observe what is going on. Therefore, Marin only needs to have people build a large-scale camp on Salt Island, and then, under the banner of the Swedish army, he can scare the Danes. As for the troops in the camp, this is easy. Anyway, there are many sailors in Marin's fleet and Lübeck's fleet. At that time, it will be no problem to let them play guest roles and pretend to be Swedish soldiers. Although the city of Lübeck is fighting at this time, the maritime trade in the Bay of Lübeck has not stopped. Moreover, there are fleets from Lübeck and Hamburg stationed in Malmö. It is no problem to find a few thousand sailors from the Lübeck merchant ship in the Bay of Lübeck. As long as the Danes see the flags of the Swedish army on Salt Island and the troops coming in and out of the fake military camp, they will not dare to move. In addition, Marin's fleet fired at Copenhagen from time to time, so it was very unlikely that the Danish army would dare to leave Copenhagen. Unless King Hans and the Danish nobles became fearless like the revolutionary martyrs. But this was impossible. In this way, Marin signed an order to send people out of the city overnight and send them to the fleet in the Bay of Lübeck, asking Captain Kidd to fire at Copenhagen to deter the Danes. However, Marin also specifically stated that the bombardment would be stronger only in the first 3 days to scare the Danes. After 3 days, sporadic bombardment was adopted to save gunpowder. At the same time, Marin also asked Tagfact, the Speaker of the Lübeck Senate, to issue an order document and send it to the Bay of Lübeck and Malmö. It was requested to temporarily recruit thousands of sailors from those merchant ships to go to Salt Island near Copenhagen to perform Swedish infantry for a period of time. Anyway, Denmark now has no navy and it is impossible to land on Salt Island. Therefore, this show is relatively safe. Moreover, in a Hanseatic city like Lübeck, most of the sailors on merchant ships have actually received some combat training. Of course, most of them are naval warfare training. Because basically all Hanseatic merchant ships and sailors on merchant ships have signed an agreement with the Lübeck Parliament, that is, in times of war, the Parliament has the right to requisition merchant ships and sailors to fight for Lübeck. Of course, the ships and sailors who participated in the war afterwards will receive certain financial compensation or tax exemptions. Because most of these sailors have some military foundation, there is no problem in using them to play the Swedish army. It's just that thousands of spears are needed as props for acting. But this is not difficult, because Sweden is a country full of forests, and you can cut down trees and cut them into long sticks to make spears. Anyway, it's not a real spear for combat, but a prop for acting. Therefore, those wooden sticks did not need to be specially processed. Just paint the tops of them a little and make them look like spears to fool the Danes. In this way, Marin let Kidd's fleet bombard Copenhagen while he got thousands of sailors on Salt Island, 4 kilometers east of Copenhagen, to pretend to be the Swedish army. Given the nature of the Danish monarchs and ministers, if they dared to send troops to land and participate in the war, there would be something fishy. After all, the nobles were very afraid of death, otherwise there would be no tradition of redeeming people with money in Europe. Basically, the nobles in the Middle Ages in Europe fought for territory, which was not only a fight for territory, but also a fight between kidnappers and hostages. Whoever won was a kidnapper, and whoever lost was a hostage, and it was rare to kill the nobles. Chapter 439, Choosing a Southbound Route. Marin's method quickly solved Wolf Esperon's worries. After receiving the reply, Wolf Esperon decisively selected 8,000 elite soldiers and prepared to go south with Sakara. At the same time, he would leave 2,000 veterans to stay in the Duchy of Schleswig. However, in order to prevent the 2,000 enemy soldiers who escaped from counterattack, Sakara decided to recruit 6,000 civilians again to assist the 2,000 veterans who stayed behind to defend the city. The specific arrangement is to leave 500 veterans and 3,000 civilians in Schleswig, the capital of the Duchy of Schleswig, to assist in defense. In Ribe, 500 veterans and 1,500 civilians were left to assist in defense. Some veterans were also deployed to defend other important towns with civilians. Wolf Esperon did not ask for all the cities in the Duchy of Schleswig to be defended. As long as several strategic points such as Schleswig and Ribe were not lost and the Danes could be delayed, it would be considered a success. And he and Sakara, together with 18,000 troops, went south to assist Marin's main force and try to defeat the Bossa coalition. However, they were a little troubled on the route of march. Because Marin's requirement for them was not only to complete the task of marching to Lübeck, but also to try to prevent the Bossa coalition from discovering their traces. Because, if these 18,000 people faced the 50,000 Bossa coalition head-on, they would definitely not have a good ending. After all, the Bossa coalition not only had a large number of people, but also had no old, weak, sick or disabled people, all of them were elite. Especially the 20,000 Swiss mercenaries, they were not inferior to Marin's men in spear melee, and were even stronger. Therefore, these 18,000 people not only had to go south to reinforce, but also had to avoid the sight of the Bossa coalition. It would be best to sneak around the rear of the Bossa coalition and suddenly launch a surprise attack. Looking at the map, Wolf Esperon and Sakara were a little scratching their heads. According to the normal route, from the Duchy of Schleswig to the south, through the eastern half of the Duchy of Holstein under the control of Lübeck, and then directly to the city of Lübeck. This route takes the shortest time and is the most normal route. But Wolf Esperon thinks that this route is the most unacceptable. Why? Because the commander of the Bossa coalition is not a fool, and he will definitely arrange a lot of scouts on this road. As long as the traces of the army are found, why don't you report it quickly? After all, one of the leaders of the Bossa coalition is Zugeter III, known as the Little Juga of Germany. If the other party does not guard against the reinforcements from the north, it is not Frederick III. It is unimaginable to want to take this road and then complete the sneak attack. Therefore, Wolf Esperon, who is more adept at strategy, directly denied this route. However, the 8,000 civilians who are currently staying in the border area between the Duchy of Schleswig and the Duchy of Holstein as a means of deception can be well utilized. For example, let them march to Lübeck with great fanfare to attract the attention of the Saxon reconnaissance cavalry and provide cover for the real army. This move is called making a feint to the east and attacking the west. When Wolf Esperon surrendered to Marin, he had studied military tactics with Marin for a period of time and knew this tactic. Therefore, the 8,000 civilians who were originally used to deceive the Danes might as well make use of their remaining heat again and deceive the Bossa coalition before disbanding. As for the Bossa coalition discovering this civilian force used for deception, that's fine. At most, let these 8,000 people surrender without a fight. When they win, these people will definitely return to their hands. Moreover, giving the other side 8,000 prisoners will also consume the other side's rations and waste part of the army to watch over. When the other side finds out that it is a fake reinforcement, the real troops have already detoured to the side and rear of the Bossa coalition. Then, launch a night attack. Speaking of night attacks, Sakara should not be too experienced. When Marin taught his officers tactics, there were many tactics for night attacks. For example, what Sakara learned was to surround the enemy in pieces, which is an important principle. In short, no matter how well the enemy is prepared, as long as the camp is breached, the enemy will definitely be in a panic. Taking advantage of this period of time, quickly intersperse and surround, isolate the enemy's camp in pieces, so that the enemy cannot concentrate its forces, then the night attack will be stable. If you encounter an unprepared army, a night attack can easily blow up the enemy's camp without having to do anything. Even if you encounter a prepared army, as long as the division and encirclement are timely, the enemy will not be able to make any waves. Anyway, the first mover will always have an advantage. Unless the number of troops attacking at night is far less than that of the enemy. Otherwise, the attacked party will always be at a disadvantage. Unless the opponent can be sure that the enemy will come to attack at night and set a trap, and at the same time let the soldiers stay up all night, waiting for the enemy to fall into the trap. However, this situation is very rare in Europe. Because there is no counselor of this level. After all, in ancient Europe, wars were accustomed to head-on confrontations, and most knights were also stubborn. Those who know how to guard against night attacks are considered to be wise generals. As for those who take advantage of the enemy's night attacks and pit the enemy, they are rare in China, not to mention the ancient Europeans with fewer brain circuits. Why does Marin value Wolf-Esperand? For this person, he even went to lobby in person. It is because Wolf-Esperand is a rare wise general in Europe who uses flooding tactics to defeat 10 times the enemy. When Marin taught Wolf-Esperand the 36 stratagems, Wolf-Esperand's eyes were shining throughout the whole process. Sakara is just a young man. Although he has learned a lot of military knowledge from Marin, he is still not as shrewd as Wolf-Esperand. After all, Wolf-Esperand is a middle-aged man, and his thinking is much more comprehensive than Sakara. After denying the route of going directly south, Wolf-Esperand and Sakara began to choose a new route. If they want to go around behind the Bassa coalition, they can go east from the Duchy of Holstein, pass through the Duchy of Mecklenburg, and go directly behind the Bassa coalition. It seems that it is possible. After all, the camp of the Bassa coalition is mainly in the southeast of Lübeck. Because the river channel in the southeast of Lübeck is the narrowest. Moreover, the Bassa coalition is currently forcing local people to fill the river to facilitate the Bassa coalition to attack the city. But this road was also denied by Wolf-Esperand. Why? Because the Duchy of Mecklenburg was too deeply influenced by the electorate of Brandenburg. Even if the Duchy of Mecklenburg may not really be of the same mind as the electorate of Brandenburg. However, due to the strong pressure from the electorate of Brandenburg, there must be nobles in the Duchy of Mecklenburg who secretly defected to the electorate of Brandenburg. At that time, when the army passed through the Duchy of Mecklenburg, if there were nobles who secretly defected to the electorate of Brandenburg and secretly informed the Bassa coalition, then the plan would fail. So, this route would not work. Then, the only option left was to take a detour from the west. But the problem was that if they took a detour from the west, the army would need to pass through the wide Elbe River, which would require a lot of ferries. Moreover, the army could not go through the Hamburg control area. Because there must be spies of the Bassa coalition in Hamburg. Once their whereabouts were discovered, it would not work. Therefore, if they took the western route, they would first need to transport the army to the west bank of the Elbe River by ship. Then, a little south of Hamburg, where the spies of the Bassa coalition would not notice, they would initiate a crossing of the river and march towards the Bassa coalition camp. However, at present, Wolf-Esperand and Sakara only had 20 to 30 ships, which could only transport 2,000 to 3,000 people at a time. An army of 18,000 would probably need to be transported many times, which would be a waste of time. Wolf-Esperand was looking at the map and thinking, while Sakara said, there were not enough ships. After a long time, Wolf-Esperand suddenly said, who said there are not enough ships? Sakara was a little stunned, but still said, I only have 20 or 30 troop transport ships, of course they are not enough. Do you want to go to Emden to transfer ships to transport troops? In that case, we must first obtain the Duke's order, and then send people to Emden port to transfer ships, which is a waste of time. No, we don't need to transfer ships from the mainland. Wolf-Esperand said firmly. Then where can we get ships? Have you forgotten? Our ally Hamburg. They are a Hanseatic power city with hundreds of merchant ships. Now is a time of tension in the war. It should not be a problem for us to borrow hundreds of ships from Hamburg to transport troops. But, if we go to Hamburg to borrow ships, will the enemy's spies find out? No, we will secretly contact the Hamburg Parliament and ask them to keep it secret when dispatching ships. If the sailors and captains who drive the ships do not know their mission when they go out to sea, what can the spies find out? Moreover, I studied the map and found that there is an Elbe-Lübeck canal in the Duchy of Saxony-Lauenburg south of Hamburg. If our army takes the ship directly and follows this Elbe-Lübeck canal directly to the vicinity of Lübeck, it will be even more convenient. Ducknikasum Saxony-Lauenburg. Lord Wolf, are you kidding? That Saxony, isn't it in the same group as the Elector of Saxony? No, you're wrong. Although the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg also has the word Saxony in its name, it has little to do with the electorate of Saxony. The electorate of Saxony and the Duchy of Saxony are ruled by the Wettin family, while the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg is ruled by the Ascanian dynasty. They are not from the same family. In the past, the Duchy of Saxe-Wittenberg, which is now the electorate of Saxony in the Duchy of Saxony, was also ruled by the Ascanian dynasty. They and the Ascanian family of the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg were originally one family, and later they were divided into two countries. However, in 1422, the Saxe-Wittenberg part was inherited by the Wettin family. From then on, the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg and Saxe-Wittenberg were no longer one family. In fact, even if they were from the same family, the two countries have been separated for more than 200 years, and the feelings have long faded. What's more, the two countries now belong to two families. Moreover, as far as I know, the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg does not have a very good relationship with the Saxon nobles, but has close relations with Lübeck and Hamburg. This is because the biggest customers of the Elbe-Lübeck Canal, which belongs to the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg, are merchant ships from Lübeck and Hamburg. The tolls collected through this canal are one of the most important fiscal revenues for the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg. Therefore, the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg is closer to Lübeck and Hamburg, and not to the two Saxon countries that also bear the name of Saxony. After all, Wolf Esperand is old and experienced, and he gave Sakara a good introduction to historical knowledge. Sakara frowned, thought for a while and said, "That is to say, the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg is a friend of Lübeck and Hamburg, so it should be no problem for our army to pass through their territory." "It should be, and we don't have to get the consent of the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg. We will drive the fleet carrying 18,000 troops directly into the territory of the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg. It doesn't matter if the other party doesn't agree, we will just force our way in. Anyway, they are powerless to stop us. At that time, I will send my reconnaissance cavalry team ashore to specifically intercept and kill those suspected messengers riding horses heading east." "What kind of scout team? Can it ensure a successful interception?" "It was assigned to me by Lord Saul. There are 50 people in total, all of them are light cavalry riding Arabian horses. Moreover, everyone is equipped with 3 clockwork flintlocks, which are specially used to intercept messengers on horseback. Those people are very skilled in shooting with clockwork flintlocks on horseback, and the horses they ride are also excellent, with fast speed and good endurance. They are perfect for intercepting enemy messengers and scouts. Our second legion has only 50 such elite scouts in total." Sakara took a breath, and then said jealously, "Why doesn't my English legion have such elite troops? With such elite troops, it will be so convenient to intercept enemy messengers. It will also facilitate the army's sneak attack. Come on, how long has your English legion been established? It doesn't even have an official number yet, so how could it possibly be equipped with such elite scouts? It is said that the Duke's headquarters only has 200 such elite interception scouts. After all, shooting and killing enemy messengers on a galloping horse requires very strong skills, which most people cannot learn. Therefore, the number of this reconnaissance cavalry specially used to kill enemy messengers has always been small. The main reason is that the shooting skills on horseback are too difficult. Most people cannot shoot accurately on a galloping horse, and may not be able to kill the enemy messenger. And they are generally equipped with only 3 clockwork muskets, and only have 3 chances to fire. If they miss, it means the interception has failed. Therefore, there are very few qualified reconnaissance cavalry used to kill enemy messengers. It is because of the small number of people that I am worried that these 50 people will not have time to kill the enemy's spies if they take the normal route in the middle, so I chose the western route. After all, the enemy must have planted many spies near the middle road, and if we take the western route, there are fewer spies on the enemy, and it is easier to intercept." "Well, you are really lucky. Then, how can we ensure that we will not be discovered by the enemy's spies when passing through the river near Hamburg? You know, there must be spies in Hamburg. This is simple. When our fleet passes through the Elbe River basin near Hamburg, we will choose to pass through it in the middle of the night. At the same time, let the Hamburg Parliament declare a curfew and don't let people go out at night." Wolf Esperand thought for a while and said, "This is a good idea. Once the curfew is implemented, the enemy spies will not be able to come out in the middle of the night to get information. If they dare to come out, they will be caught in the act. Of course. However, the plan to borrow ships from Hamburg and then go through the Elbe River and the Elbe-Lübeck Canal must be approved by the Duke. And the matter of borrowing ships from Hamburg and proposing a curfew to Hamburg is best coordinated by the Duke. You and I don't have that much face." "That's right, I'll write the report now." "Okay, I'll sign it after I finish it." Chapter 440, Shocking Scam. Because the city of Lübeck is surrounded by water on several sides, the electors of Brandenburg and Saxony, who are also landlubbers, are unable to cross the river to attack the city immediately, nor can they fully surround it. Therefore, as long as a light boat is sent across the river in the middle of the night, it is still possible to communicate with the city of Lübeck. After the signalman arrives at the foot of Lübeck by light boat in the middle of the night, he will take a hanging basket to go up and down the city wall, which is quite convenient. When Marin received the joint report from Wolf Esprand and Sakara, everyone praised him. Wolf is really an outlier among Europeans, and he is good at using strategies. In fact, Wolf Esprand was forced by reality to specialize in strategies. Why? The reason is simple. Wolf Esprand was born in the weak Dithmarschen area and was the leader of the Dithmarschen army against Denmark. However, the total number of soldiers in the Dithmarschen area is only more than 1,000. Denmark can easily dispatch tens of thousands of troops. With such a huge disparity in strength, if the weaker party is not clear-headed and wants to fight head-on, then he is a fool. A weak person who has no strength and is confronting a rich and handsome man head-on is definitely a fool. If the weak want to defeat the strong, they can only resort to conspiracy and intrigue. Even if some people praise the open conspiracy and belittle the conspiracy, it is the deliberate guidance and propaganda of those who are powerful. Because conspiracy is the only way for the loser to defeat the rich and handsome man. If the loser is not clear-headed and easily gives up the conspiracy and plays the open conspiracy with the rich and handsome opponent, he will definitely die ugly. The rich and handsome men are also afraid of being tricked, so they manipulate public opinion, belittle the conspiracy and praise the open conspiracy. In fact, this is to make the losers lose the opportunity to counterattack and maintain the stability of their privileged class. In fact, throughout the ages, all the strategies used by wise generals who have defeated the strong with the weak are conspiracies. Only through conspiracy and intrigue could a general like Wolf Esprand lead 1,000 militiamen to defeat the Danish army of tens of thousands and drown 7,000 Danish soldiers. It was precisely because the gap between the strength of the Dithmarschen region and the Kingdom of Denmark was so large that Wolf Esprand was forced to use conspiracy and intrigue to deal with the Danes for freedom and finally won the war by flooding. For military strategists, the combination of odd and even can be invincible. Only odd is too risky. And only even lacks flexibility and is easily plotted by conspiracy and intrigue. Therefore, truly great military strategists generally need the combination of odd and even, not just odd and even. Wolf Esprand is one of the few generals in Europe who understand strategy in this era, coupled with the traditional European Orthodox education. Therefore, his ability is better than most generals of this era. Of course, if he wants to win the battle, he must have strong strength. Otherwise, if you only rely on surprise attacks to win, if you encounter a cautious enemy, as long as you block his surprise, you will easily be unlucky. Therefore, while Marin is good at using conspiracies and tricks, he also attaches great importance to the training and improvement of his own army's combat effectiveness. If you only rely on surprise, you can't last long. Only by taking into account both surprise and justice can you truly become a hegemonic prince. Of course, in this era, conspiracies and tricks are not popular among Europeans. Therefore, most of them are too straightforward. If you encounter a cunning opponent, it is easy to suffer a big loss. Therefore, in this era, using ingenious strategies in Europe is quite effective. However, Wolf Esprand is, after all, a half-bucket of water conspirator and lacks ability. The one who is really good at conspiracies and tricks is Marin, who has experienced the information explosion in later generations. After all, Marin has seen too many examples of ingenious strategies in books and on the internet in later generations. For example, in the reports submitted by Wolf Esprand and Sakara, Marin saw a lot of room for improvement. Take the matter of sending 8,000 civilians disguised as the main force to the south. Originally, Marin asked Wolf Esprand to create the illusion that 8,000 main forces were going south. Wolf Esprand did it, but he made a very fatal mistake. He did not send civilians to accompany him, but only sent 8,000 main forces to the south. This is very unreasonable. Because now that countries are mobilizing their armies, they will definitely send a huge number of civilians to transport military rations and supplies. Otherwise, if the combat troops are responsible for pulling carts to transport military rations and supplies at the same time, once they encounter an emergency combat situation, they will have no energy and physical strength to fight, and they will not have time to change their formation. After all, transporting military rations and supplies is very physically demanding. Fortunately, the commander of the Danish army, Prince Christian, was young and inexperienced. If an old fox like Frederick III heard that there were only 8,000 people heading south, he would definitely doubt the truth. How could a large army not bring civilians with it? So, Marin wrote to the Hamburg Parliament, asking them to borrow ships and impose a curfew, and also wrote back to Wolf-Esperand and Sakara, asking them to recruit another 7,000 or 8,000 civilians, disguised as civilians, and follow the previous 8,000 people south. First, this looks more reasonable. Second, with more people, it is more deterrent. However, in order to cover the movement of the real army, the 8,000 fake main forces cannot march too fast. Otherwise, if the Bossa coalition forces are attracted to attack too early, everything will be exposed. With Frederick III's cunning, he will definitely guard against the surprise attack of the real reinforcements. Therefore, Marin decided to perfect the strategy of Wolf-Esperand and Sakara, and create a shocking scam to make an old fox like Frederick III believe that the fake reinforcements were the real main force. After thinking about it, Marin believed that a main force composed of 8,000 main forces must march very quickly. Therefore, in order to deceive the Bossa coalition, it is necessary to make the Elector of Brandenburg Joachim I and the Elector of Saxony Frederick III believe that there are too many new recruits in this support army, so they can't walk fast. The discipline of the new recruits is not good and requires a long time of training. It is reasonable for the large army to walk slowly when marching with new recruits, and it will not arouse the suspicion of Frederick III. Therefore, Marin needs to make Frederick III believe that there are many new recruits in this support army, which slows down the march. For this reason, Marin came up with a way deliberately leaking false information. How to deliberately leak it is very simple. Marin will let Wolf-Esperand deliberately send a messenger to carry the secret letter to Lübeck city semi-publicly to attract the enemy to intercept and kill. If the messenger is alone, I believe that the scouts under the Elector Frederick III of Saxony will definitely not give up intercepting him. At this time, the lone messenger needs to deliberately flee in panic, and then accidentally lose the secret letter, and then let the Saxon scouts pick it up. In this secret letter, Wolf-Esperand will report to Marin, at the northern border of the Duchy of Schleswig, he is leading 5,000 main veterans and tens of thousands of civilians to fight against the attack of the Danish army. Therefore, only half of the main force, that is, 5,000 veterans, can be sent south with 5,000 new recruits. In this way, it makes sense that the reinforcements are moving slowly. After all, there are half novices. As for how 8,000 people disguised as 10,000 troops, it is too easy, the team can be dispersed a little. If this secret letter falls into the hands of the enemy, they will understand that half of the 10,000 troops going south to rescue are parallel imports. In fact, these people are all parallel imports, and there are not even 10,000 people. As for whether the news of Denmark's defeat would be known by the Bossa coalition, there is no need to worry about this. Because the Jutland Peninsula and the German region are separated by the sea and the Duchy of Schleswig. Today, the Duchy of Schleswig has been under full martial law, and outsiders cannot pass through at all. And the Danes are now unable to send intelligence to the land through the sea. After all, the fleets of Lübeck and Hamburg will definitely not let it. Therefore, for a long time, it was not easy for the Bossa coalition to know the situation in Denmark. The fake secret letter said that half of the veterans and tens of thousands of people in the Duchy of Schleswig were relying on the city to resist the Danish army. It was very reasonable and easy to believe. If it was said that the 10,000 troops of the Duchy of Schleswig destroyed the 20,000 troops of Denmark in a short period of time, others would not believe it. Of course, the excuse of half of the recruits in the team was not enough to make the fake main force walk very slowly. Therefore, Marin came up with other deception tricks pretending to transport a lot of artillery and baggage. Artillery and baggage are very difficult to transport by land. Therefore, it is very reasonable to affect the speed of the army. For this reason, Marin ordered Wolf-Esperand through a letter, asking him to gather a large number of carpenters in the Duchy of Schleswig, cut some logs into the shape of artillery, paint them on the outside, and seal the muzzle part, moisture-proof, to make the appearance look like a real artillery. Then, let the carpenters build an East Frisian-style gun carriage and assemble them. At the same time, some wooden balls of the same size as iron ball shells were cut out, painted black, and looked like iron ball shells. They were placed on carts and transported by civilians, laboriously. So many cannons and iron ball shells need to be transported, which will definitely affect the marching speed. In addition, with oak barrels loaded with gunpowder and sacks of food for so many civilians, the baggage troops must be mighty. It is reasonable to affect the speed of the army. Even the resourceful Frederick III could hardly see the flaw. After all, half of them are new soldiers, and there are piles of artillery, iron ball shells, gunpowder barrels, and food and other supplies that need to be transported. Is it strange that the army marches slowly? It would be strange if it wasn't slow. Moreover, with so many artillery and ammunition, people have to believe that it is the main force. Because, these days, artillery is made of copper and is very precious. There are so many artillery. If it weren't the main force, no one would believe it. When Marin's guidance was delivered to Wolf Esprand, who was good at scheming, took a breath of cold air after reading it. Such a shocking scam. As long as no one leaked the secret inside, anyone could be deceived successfully. After all, who the hell could come up with the evil idea of disguising logs as artillery and wooden balls as shells? In Europe at this time, only a shady guy like Marin could come up with such a sinister trick.